Now, the investigators were not perfect, and as we told you when they asked about that January 2006 phone call, in this interview, Coach Hanningmeyer, he got the direction of the call right, but he gave the wrong date, January 2005 versus January 2006. And counsel explained to you that when Mr. McNair was asked about it, his mind started going back to 2005, different time, different place, different circumstances. And he suggested that that's why Mr. McNair didn't answer the question or didn't have any recollection. First of all, you'll hear from Coach Hanningmeyer, and he's going to admit that he provided the wrong date. And I wish he wouldn't have done that, because we wouldn't have had to talk about it now. But there's 2 points that you will see. First, throughout the interview, Coach McNair denied ever talking to one day. 2005, 2006, ever. But the second point is probably the most important. Coach McNair did have another chance to explain, and that was his most important chance. Because after the second interview, he got to appear before that committee. The committee were like the judges. And in that hearing, everyone knew the right date. He was asked about the right date. And he talked about what was going on in 2006 when he answered that question. And he still said he had no memory of having that call. He talked about, and his counsel talked at the hearing about the agent meetings that were happening around then. So he got a chance to explain that to them. The mistake in the interview did not prevent him from being able to understand what date mattered and to tell the committee whatever he wanted to tell them about that. But he still had no memory of it. That's what he said. And it wasn't just, pardon me, it wasn't just Lloyd Lake's word, and it wasn't just the phone records and the photograph. There was one other bit. Lloyd Lake's ex-girlfriend, Maisha Jones, was asked about a call. Now, I want to be clear, and I don't want to over-represent this to you. She didn't say she overheard a call. It's not that kind of situation. She's not there for a call. But she did say that she talked to Lloyd Lake. And he talked about calling people to talk to Reggie, or this is going to go public because he's not going to lose his money. So what did the evidence show? Remember, these are the 3 people who paid Bush the benefits. We focus mostly on Lloyd Lake because he's the one who actually talked to the NCAA. But the committee also would find that Michael Michaels was involved, and he paid the benefits together with Lake. And the committee would also separately find that Ornstein, another agent, paid benefits, and he's the guy who got Reggie to go with him rather than with these guys. And what you'll see in the information developed by the NCAA investigators is that Coach McNair had some kind of contact with all 3. You've seen the photograph, the calls from McNair and the call to McNair on Lake. Michaels is in that photograph. And separately, in the same call records, there's calls with Coach McNair and Ornstein, and when I had a chance to talk to Mr. McNair and asked him, he did acknowledge that he knew that Reggie had an internship with Michael Ornstein and that he knew who Ornstein was. And the point I want to make here is that I can't, based on the information in the record, make another slide like this and put a different USC coach's face there. There's no information in the record linking Pete Carroll to Michael Michaels. There was no evidence of contact between Carroll and Lloyd Lake. And the same is true of other coaches in the USC staff. So it's not that the investigators singled Coach McNair out. The evidence singled Coach McNair out. But this was still just the investigation. And the committee had not yet made a decision. And it's their decision to make. So once all this information came to them, if they didn't agree, they didn't have to make any of these findings. Here they are again, and as I said, you'll hear from a number of them. And they'll talk to you about this hearing. This was a long hearing, 3 days long, because it wasn't just about Coach McNair, it was about the Reggie Bush story as a whole. It was about whether USC lacked institutional control and wasn't monitoring the situation. It was also about football and tennis issues. I'm sorry, basketball and tennis issues at USC. It was a long hearing. Mr. McNair, as is his right, attended with his lawyer, and they both got to talk directly to that committee. So he got to look those folks in the eye and tell them whatever he wanted to say. And his lawyer got to argue on his behalf, and did argue on his behalf. And USC and its representatives were also present, and also had a chance to speak. And Coach McNair walked out of that hearing feeling that he had gotten a fair deal. I asked him, is there anything that any of the committee members said or did in that hearing that made you think that they were out to get you? And he said, no. When you walked out of the hearing that day, were you hopeful they were going to rule for you? And he said, yes. And ultimately, they didn't rule for him. At least not on the basic story about Lloyd Lake. And he was disappointed. But you will hear from these committee members about what they thought about Todd McNair. I told you Dennis Thomas is one of the ones who will testify, and he's in a little bit of a unique situation because he had been a coach, and he had been a football player. And he said he respected Todd McNair as a fellow coach, and he's going to tell you that from the witness stand, that he had an open mind and that he gave Coach McNair the benefit of the doubt. And because he's going to be right here, you're going to get to listen to that and judge him. Judge his credibility and see what you think. See if you think he is being straight and honest with you. And he's also going to tell you about what he thought of Lloyd Lake. Because it was not a secret that Lloyd Lake had a criminal history. The committee members knew about that, and USC pointed it out. And Dr. Thomas is going to tell you that he needed to know that there was evidence supporting what Lloyd Lake said. Just Lloyd Lake saying something wasn't good enough. But if there were records, if there were photographs, if it made sense, then he was willing to go along with it. You will also hear from Eleanor Myers, another committee member. She's the one from Temple, which is Todd McNair's alma mater. And she'll tell you from that stand what she thought, but she also wrote about it in an email. And she's talking here about what the committee thought, and she said, "We could not believe that Coach McNair, didn't remember a nearly 3-minute call in the middle of the night from a furious Lloyd Lake." After all, think about how counsel has described Lloyd Lake to you. Convicted felon, drug dealer, gang member. He's panicking because his deal with Reggie is falling through. He calls Todd McNair in the middle of the night and they talk for 2.5 minutes. I think if you use your common sense, you will come to the conclusion that that's likely to be a memorable phone call. Maybe not a pleasant phone call, but certainly a memorable one. And think too about the circumstances. Counsel told you there was a panel of agents the next day. Based on what you've heard and what you will hear about Lloyd Lake, do you really think he would call Todd McNair and say, "Oh, can I get on a panel?" But not in those 2.5 minutes mentioned, "Oh, by the way, I don't just want to be on a panel, I am his agent. We have a deal. We've had a deal." These are the kind of things the committee had to decide. As counsel told you, there's no recording of this call. There's no recording of any of the calls with McNair and Lake. So they had to figure out what made more sense. Lake's version or McNair's version. And then, after a lot of deliberation, they issued this report. But maybe I shouldn't go there yet because I want to emphasize the deliberation. Not only was there 5 years of process in this case, but you heard that they discussed the case in person. You heard that they discussed the case by email. They got on phone calls. They went through a process to get there. And only after they went through a process did they issue their report. And if I could have the report again, thank you. And these are the two big findings, the two bottom line findings that I talked to you about. They said, Coach McNair, he's the assistant football coach, at least by that January call, at least by then, you heard all the sequence that we talked about, but at least by then, he had knowledge that Reggie Bush and Michaels and Lake likely were engaged in NCAA violations. They didn't say that he knew everything. They didn't say that he knew all the details, but he knew enough based on what Lake had said, based on what the records showed that there was contact, and based on their common sense understanding. And that they found that Coach McNair provided false and misleading information. Because he just, even in the face of a photograph and phone records on the same night, said, "I don't know who that is. That's just somebody jumping in the back of the photograph." And I told you that even though they made these findings, they only gave him a penalty for 1 year, and that penalty let him do 80% of his job. He just had to go 1 year without contacting high school kids. And you'll hear from these committee members, they're going to tell you that's about as low as you can go. They've given folks 10-year penalties. They've given folks penalties where they're not allowed to coach at all for many years in a row. But while they made findings against Todd McNair, while they felt that he knew enough and that he didn't tell the truth, they also felt that he needed a more moderate penalty because they had seen worse and they had penalized more heavily in those first cases. And I told you that there was a time when Todd McNair actually admitted to one lie. This is about the San Diego party. In 2005, Lloyd Lake had said he met McNair there. Todd McNair initially told the investigators that he went to that party with his friend, Mike Bayless. But then the NCAA talked to Bayless, and Bayless said no, it didn't happen. So Todd McNair was in a bind. And so he changed his story. And he admitted to the lie, the first lie, in the hearing. Now, if this committee was out to ruin Todd McNair, to end his career, if this committee was not acting in good faith, all they had to do was say, he admitted to lying, it's against the rules to lie, and penalize him for that. There would have been a piece of cake. And there would have been nothing to attack in the lawsuit because he himself had admitted to the lie. But they took a different approach. Because he kind of fessed up on this one thing, they said, even though they had grave doubts as to the credibility of Todd McNair, they did not make an unethical conduct finding of the San Diego party. The investigators wanted them to, but they said no. They had doubts, they didn't feel like they could trust him, but on this point, they gave him a break. Who knows what they would have done if he similarly fessed up about Lane? Who knows what they would have done if he said, maybe, you know, I did know him some. We talked some. This is what we talked about. None of us really know because that's not how it happened. He never went back. So, I'm sorry, there's one other point before I get to those guys. You heard Mr. McNair's counsel argue that the committee wanted to get Todd McNair in order to hit and penalize USC more heavily. And I think I understand why he's arguing that to you. Because he's got to give you some kind of motive. Why would these people volunteer their time, travel halfway across the country, sit in a room for 3 days, and then deliberate for weeks just to get Todd McNair? So I think he's trying to give you a reason. The problem is the evidence is going to contradict that explanation. You're going to find out several things from the witnesses and the documents. One, the committee decided about findings against USC before they decided about findings against Coach McNair. They decided that USC lacked institutional control before they made any finding about Coach McNair. And two, as these deliberations went on, they made additional findings about USC. There was a lot of deliberation about when did the Bush benefits start. Because if they started in 2004, that affects the national championship season. If they only start in mid-2005, then it just affects the season where they lost the title game. And those decisions are what drove the ultimate penalty against USC. There will be no testimony from this chair, no testimony in the depositions that the committee members made any finding against Todd McNair in order to get USC. And in fact, you'll hear in their deliberations, you'll see in the documents that the penalties didn't just get heavier during the deliberations, they also got lighter. They were talking for a while about a TV ban on USC. Taking them off of TV so their games couldn't be televised. But they ultimately decided against that. Even after they decided on Todd McNair. So, let me turn to these guys. These are two of the gentlemen that counsel pictured in red, because they are not the voting members. When you see this report, and you look at the names in the back, their names will not be on it. They didn't have a vote, and their names are not on it. And you will hear from them. Mr. Uphoff is going to come here and testify live. So he's going to explain to you why he did what he did. He will tell you, first of all, that both him and Mr. Howard were new to this process. For Mr. Uphoff, it was his first time as coordinator of appeals, and he's going to explain, he's kind of like the lawyer for the committee. Because if they decide something, they've got to be able to defend it on appeal before the second committee. And in the NCAA's process, it's not NCAA employees who defend the decision, it's somebody from the committee. So his job was to defend their decision on appeal. And as part of that, he did advise them on how he viewed the evidence. Now, you'll hear, look, ask different committee members about, did he give too much advice? Did he make his feelings too known? Did he strike the proper balance? But in the end, you will hear from all of these committee members, the ones who voted, the ones whose names are on this report, that they made up their own minds. And you will also hear, you saw that in counsel's presentation, at one point, Mr. Uphoff sent a 7-page memo to the committee. And that's something that they're really focused on because he is supposed to be advising and defending them, but he's not supposed to be, under the rules, an active participant in deliberations. But what you'll also see is that he checked with several people before sending that memo, including with the head of the committee, and he said, listen, I think this would be helpful, or something to that effect, but I'm going to check with you before I send it, because I don't want to do something that the head of the committee would think is not helpful. And you'll also hear from Mr. Howard. You'll hear him on the video, and that's because he's under the weather. He can't come here, but you'll hear a lot of his testimony in the video. And what he'll tell you is that this was his first time. He was an observer. Neither of these guys asked any questions during the hearing. And then, when they were allowed to be in the room for deliberations, he'll tell you that he sat quietly. Didn't say anything until the chairman asked him, all right, Mr. Howard, you've heard us going at it for a while. Why don't you tell us what you think? And once he was invited, he did share his thoughts. Now, when council had that board up, we walked you through a lot of emails. But what might have gotten lost in that is that almost the vast majority of the emails they showed you are not among any voting members of the committee. So Uphoff was emailing with Cooper. I'll talk about who Jeff Cooper is. He's kind of an assistant or a scribe for this committee. But he's not a voting member. He's not a member of any kind of committee. Uphoff and Cooper on the 23rd. Uphoff and Cooper again on the 23rd. Uphoff and Howard on the 23rd. Here, it's Uphoff, Howard, and Brian Halloran. Brian Halloran was a voting member, but he quickly got disengaged from that email chain. You'll see that. You'll hear him talk about it. Cooper and Uphoff, Uphoff and Howard. So what you'll see is these emails are side conversations. You know, it's interesting. Counsel said that Scott Thompson, Todd McNair's lawyer before the committee, did not know about these emails until they were discovered and produced in this litigation. You know who else didn't know about these emails? The voting members of the committee. They'll tell you that they first found out about them in this litigation too. So how could they have been influenced by something they didn't even know existed? And it's these emails that I think counsel for Mr. McNair really mines for the kind of things he wants you to focus on and to try to get upset at the NCAA. But these are private emails between colleagues and some of them friends. You'll hear that Mr. Uphoff and Mr. Howard were friends long before this committee. So they shared their thoughts. And some of these emails perhaps shouldn't have been written, contain some comments that are questionable. But the judge will explain to you that what's said in private between friends and colleagues who are not even voting members of the committee is very different than what's said in the published report. That's where we look to see if somebody got the thing. If we had to read every private email and look there for defamation, I think everyone in this country would be a victim of defamation. Because I'm sure everyone's had at least one nasty email written about it. And ultimately, the bottom line test for you, the question is, what impact did this have on the voting members? And what they will tell you is that it did. I put these two up because they've been deposed, so I know what's in their video. Joe Patuto said they decided based on information in the record. Britton Banowski focused on the record. And they were specifically asked, well, do you think that, your hand was twisted, your views were overcome by what these other guys were talking about? And he said, no way. So you'll get to hear that. Decide what you think of what they tell you. And it's not just them, you'll also hear from the live witnesses here, and they will tell you the same. So, let me not talk about this one. This is Shep Cooper. He is an NCAA employee, and he's there. His title at the time was director of the COI, but that's misleading. What everyone will explain to you is what he is a liaison. No vote, doesn't get to ask questions. He's there to kind of be the scribe. He sits in the room, he jots things down, and he helps them put together the report based on what the committee decides. But he has no say. He'll tell you that he has no say. But Mr. Cooper wrote this email. Only went to Rodney Uphoff, but it said McNair shouldn't be coaching at any level, and it went on to make negative comments about his character and his person. And it's completely unacceptable. It just is. Don't take my word for it, because we asked the president of the NCAA what he thought when he saw that. And he said this was ill-advised and inappropriate. And he said that Mr. Cooper suffered a consequence. He was effectively demoted. They created a new position, and he was replaced by a different leader of that unit. So I began by saying some things were done incorrectly, and they will take responsibility for that. That's an example. But one thing that I don't want you guys to miss in all these emails, maybe the most important thing about these emails, is that they were all written after that 3-day hearing. After these people got to listen to Todd McNair tell a story that they simply could not believe. You will not find one bad comment in this case about Todd McNair from anyone until after they felt like Mr. McNair didn't tell them the truth. You're not going to see any emails before this hearing of people saying something bad about Todd McNair. You're not going to see emails or communications from investigators before the interviews saying anything bad about Todd McNair. And that's a big difference. It's one thing to act in bad faith, to be unfair. Another thing to just get frustrated because you feel like you just got lied to. Another thing the council talked about was information outside the record. And one of the complaints in this case is that 2 years before the hearing, Joe Patuto watched TV. She's one of the voting members. And she watched TV, and there was an episode on there, HBO, about Reggie Bush and Lloyd Lake, and Lloyd Lake was interviewed. You'll hear her explanation of that. You'll hear that she had forgotten about it by the time of the hearing. They also complained that Mr. Howard knew a little bit about the dog issue that Todd McNair had back in the 90s. Well, he knew about it because there was a big article in the LA Times in 2007. It was kind of big news at the time. He also knew about it because he had been a Chiefs fan, and there had been protests at Chiefs games back when Todd McNair was a player. But the bottom line on this, as I told you, and as the committee members will tell you, is that they didn't decide the case based on this. They decided it based on the record. And there's no rule that they can't turn on their televisions or read the newspaper. Especially not 2 years before. When Joe Patuto watched this video, it was 2 years before there was a hearing. No allegations had been made. Unless she was clairvoyant, she would have no way of knowing that she would sit on that panel. The council also talked about a statement that Mark Emmert, the president of the NCAA, made. And he made it after the report was issued, but before the appeal was decided. And they try to suggest that this somehow influenced the proceeding. This is one of those examples where they don't have any evidence, so they're just going to suggest it to you and hope you follow along. You're not going to hear any evidence that any member of the appellate committee even knew about this statement. And you'll also see in the ask President Emmer about it, the statement's not even about Todd McNair. The statement is about the Reggie Bush case, and he says, it took him a long time, but they got it right, I think. That's all he said. And the process still wasn't over, and Mr. McNair still was not out of chances because now it went to the second committee, the Appeals Committee. They are, again, independent. They don't work for the NCAA. They come from all over. It's a smaller committee, but they come from different walks of life, different experiences. 2 of them are from major colleges, Vanderbilt and Texas. 2 are from other kinds of organizations. And they heard the information. And they found that the first committee had enough evidence against Mr. McNair. Had enough evidence that he likely knew, had enough evidence that he didn't tell the truth. And we asked, what did he think? This is Patty Bollendorf. And you'll see some of her depositions. And she tried her best to be fair, and I think that'll come across. But she said, it appeared that when Mr. McNair was asked about things based upon what we saw in the record, he attempted to explain them away rather than being upfront about them. And I want to go back to that point about trying to use Coach McNair to get to USC. That's not true. Here's more proof of why it's not true. By the time the case got to the appeal, they split them up. Coach McNair's appeal was 1 hearing and 1 report. The USC case was another hearing and another report. So when the Appellate Committee upheld the USC findings, they weren't allowed to even look at the findings about Coach McNair. There were 2 separate things by that point. So that is the end of the 5-year process. But I still need to address, what has Coach McNair done since? And the evidence will show you that he reached out to a handful of friends. Council said that he applied to 6 teams, but some of those applications were not. First of all, none of them were formal applications, and a lot of them were texting or calling a single friend on that team. He didn't get an agent. He didn't apply broadly. And they're going to argue to you that that's just because it's not done that way. You basically just know who you know, and you get the jobs that way. But we will present evidence that it takes more. In today's sports world, it's not just good enough. You've got to put yourself out there. You've got to submit applications. You've got to be formal and professional about how you go about it. And we show you that dozens of coaches have had worse findings and sanctions than Mr. McNair. These are just some of the ones we'll talk about. And you'll hear they've been found to have committed all kinds of violations and gotten 5, 6, 7, 8 or more years of sanctions, and yet they all were able to get work. Counsel's explanation for all of that was that this case was more newsworthy than the others. But you'll see that just doesn't hold up. First of all, the Bush case was newsworthy. Most of you had heard of Reggie Bush, but the McNair part of it was comparatively very lightly covered news. But some of these cases you'll hear were very significant. Some of these are very prominent coaches, head coaches. Bruce Pearl, head coach at Tennessee, in a very controversial situation. Major findings against him, unethical conduct findings against him. He's coaching at Auburn basketball today. Similar story with Calvin Sampson. Similar story with all of these folks. And they're not just that they got back into coaching, they got high-level jobs. So Mr. McNair and his lawyers want you to assume they couldn't have done any of that. But they have to ask you to assume because we don't know what would have happened if he had truly gotten out there and tried. If he had reached out broadly, if he tried to build up momentum, what would have happened? We don't know because he never did. So, I want to make a few final points. Throughout this case, you're going to be staring at this question. Can Mr. McNair prove it? He is the plaintiff, and under our system, before he gets any award, much less millions and millions of dollars, he's got to prove his case. Can he prove defamation? Defamation. For him to prove it, he's got to show you two things. That the committee got the bottom line wrong, and that they acted in bad faith. And the evidence is not going to support that. In fact, on that first part, I think even they know that the evidence is not going to support it. So they're going to try to kind of go around it. Instead of focusing on the bottom line, instead of focusing on the findings that Coach McNair likely knew, and that he didn't tell the truth, they're going to go through this report and say that they could have written 2 sentences in this 67-pager a little bit more accurately. That's not defamation. If you agree that the committee reasonably found that Coach McNair knew and that he didn't tell the truth, then they have done nothing to harm Coach McNair. Breach of contract. They told you they're suing under the NCAA manual as the contract. Well, you'll find out, first of all, this is not a contract. Mr. McNair is not a party to this contract. And nor did, we will show you, the NCAA didn't do anything to make him a third party to the contract. But more than that, this is the contract that also contains Coach McNair's responsibilities to cooperate, to tell the truth, provide full information. And what you'll hear what the law is, as the Judge Shelley will explain it to you, is that you can't break a contract and then sue somebody because you think they didn't live up to their part. On negligence, well, like I told you, we agree that mistakes were made, some bad questions were asked, but we also showed you, and the evidence will show that Mr. McNair had plenty of opportunities to clear it up. If he had all the opportunities to clear it up and he still lost, then he hasn't been harmed by those errors in the questions. And on negligence too, they talked about fairness, and they'll talk a lot about fairness. But when they do, I want you to ask yourself, fairness to whom? Because the NCAA rules require fairness in general. I'll give you an example. They say that because Lloyd Lake refused to be interviewed with USC president, that was unfair. After 18 months of trying to get that interview, NCAA investigators agreed to it, even with those restrictions. And if they hadn't done that, they never would have found out anything about pressure. This whole investigation would have gone. Is that the fair result? Because it couldn't be done perfectly? You don't have to have an interview, you don't even talk to Lloyd Lake? And the last part, Mr. McNair has to prove damages caused by the NCAA. Not damages because, for other reasons, he's had a hard time moving on. Not damages because he hasn't applied broadly. Not damages because he hasn't gotten an agent. Not damages because he got asked an incorrect question, but damages that his career was ended by the NCAA. That's their whole theory of damages, and it just doesn't add up when you hear about what all other coaches have done who faced worse situations. So I want to end with 3 quick key questions. This is my last slide. So I'll just say that. It's my last slide. The end is near. 4 o'clock is near. Council and I both went longer than we thought we would. 3 key questions that I want you to ask yourself throughout this case. Number 1, did Mr. McNair tell the truth to this committee and to the investigators before that? Number 2, did the committee's report end his coaching career? And number 3, did Mr. McNair live up to his own responsibilities? Once you've seen all the evidence, and when I'm back up here arguing in closing, I'm going to argue to you that the answer to all 3 is no. No, Coach McNair didn't tell the truth. No, the committee did not end his coaching career. And no, Coach McNair did not live up to his responsibilities. And I want to pause a little bit on that last one. I've used the word responsibility a lot. Can you keep it back up? That's okay. I've used the word responsibility several times. I don't think we heard it in Mr. McNair's counsel's presentation. Now, the NCAA had responsibilities in this case. And we will take responsibility for mistakes, for the incorrect questions, for some of the emails. We'll explain what we did to fix them, or why they didn't matter to the decision. But Coach McNair also had a responsibility. He had a responsibility to Reggie Bush to protect him from people like Lloyd Lake, who were just looking to take advantage of him. He had a responsibility to all the schools and to the NCAA to tell them the truth about what he knew, what his dealings were with Lake, about how close his relationship was with Reggie Bush. And he has a responsibility to himself and his family to move on. To pick himself back up, apply broadly, and do what all those other coaches have done. And the evidence will show Mr. McNair hasn't done this. And it's that, not any mistakes or errors by the NCAA.